Why did God plant the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden? Now, what makes this all the more perplexing is when you consider that God has exhaustive, definite foreknowledge. He knew that they would eat of it, and yet he put it there anyways. Well, if there is one truth that we can discern from God's purposes in this story, is that he desires genuine relationship from his creatures. Not program loyalty, but real reciprocal relationship. We see it in the way that he speaks to Adam and Eve, the way he asks questions. We see it in the trust he extends, placing them in the garden to do work, giving them responsibilities, commissioning them to carry out his will in the world. This is the language of love, not control. But here's the thing about love. It requires a dangerous but essential ingredient for it to work. That ingredient is freedom. No freedom, no love. Because love, by definition, must be freely given. Now, some read this story and come away with the opposite conclusion. They say that God desires to curtail the freedom of humanity. I mean, that's why he put the tree there. He didn't want them to have access to certain benefits and blessings and prerogatives and privileges. In fact, that's the impression that is expressed by the serpent himself in the story. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? The insinuation is that God is holding something back from humanity, right? But of course, God never said that they could not eat of any tree in the garden. Let's go back and look at it. He said, "You may surely eat of every tree in the garden, but only of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." Adam and Eve could eat from every tree in the garden as much as they wanted, whenever they wanted. But there was only a single tree that they could not eat from. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to call that restriction rather than freedom. The prohibition to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil affected them in no way whatsoever. It did not remove anything that they did not already have in abundance. But we still have to grapple with that one tree. The one tree that God did say they cannot eat from. Why put it in the garden at all, especially if it posed such a temptation to Adam and Eve? Well, I want to suggest that putting that tree in the garden actually increased their freedom rather than decreased it. So, what is freedom? What do we mean when we use the word freedom? And of course, we're talking about freedom of the will here. At its most basic level, freedom of the will is the ability to act without any external constraint. So if you're going to go cast a vote in an election, then you must be able to do so without anyone or anything forcing you to vote one way or another. If an electrode, say a mad scientist put an electrode in your brain, he implanted it in there, so that it forced you to vote for a single candidate, then your vote would not be free, no matter how peaceful the process appeared on the outside. So long as you have no external constraint, you are free. But there's a deeper level to freedom, one that's more meaningful than simply being uncoerced. Imagine entering the voting booth only to find a ballot with just one candidate's name on the ballot. No coercion to vote, no external manipulation. Technically, you are free to vote for whomever you like, but you only have one option to like. Well, most of us would consider that kind of freedom, that degree of freedom, to be undeserving of the name for a very obvious reason. It lacks any alternative possibilities. You're not free, you're not truly free, unless you have the ability to choose otherwise. You must be able to say this and not that, or that and not this. So then, were Adam and Eve free to obey God? Yes, but only because they were also free to disobey him. That's what the tree of knowledge of good and evil represents in the garden, the possibility of rejection, the freedom to say no to God. Love requires freedom, and freedom requires the ability not to love. So, freedom is the ability to choose between alternative possibilities without any external constraint. Adam and Eve had that, and so do you, and so do I. But there is one additional ingredient necessary to make freedom genuine. A free person must be permitted to live with the consequences of his choices. Moral freedom must carry real weight, or it really isn't freedom at all. Imagine a world where every act of violence or harm is magically neutralized. So a knife plunges down toward its victim, but then it turns to putty as it makes contact. A bullet pierces the heart, but then the heart heals within 2 seconds like Wolverine. Right? A cruel insult is spoken, but the sound evaporates before it actually hits the eardrums. Would that really be a world of freedom, or would it be a world with the illusion of freedom? In such a world, our choices, they wouldn't really even matter. Actions would lose all their meaning. Love, sacrifice, cruelty, and courage would all collapse into insignificance because nothing would ever really make a difference in the end. True freedom requires not only the possibility of doing otherwise, but the reality of bearing the outcomes of our decisions, whether good or bad. What we can conclude from the story in the Garden of Eden is that God loves freedom. He desires to enter into real relationship with his creatures, not on the basis of coercion, but on the basis of genuine love. Love requires freedom, and freedom requires the ability not to love. Now, is it all worth it, though? Is it worth the pain, the bloodshed, the suffering, the wars, the loneliness, all the stuff that comes with freedom? Evidently, it is. God could have created a world without us, without intelligent, rational beings. He could have created a world with just a silent world, with rocks and rivers. He could have maybe created a world full of rabbits, and that's it. Just a bunch of bunny rabbits running around, operating by instinct alone, incapable of cruelty, but also incapable of love. Such a world, it would have been very safe. It would have been the safe thing to do. It would have been predictable. It would have been free of pain, but also free of meaning. But is there any doubt in your mind that a world like that, though it lacks evil, is inferior to a world with humans, but also with evil? A world with Mozart and Mr. Rogers and Mother Teresa and Lucille Ball? A world with sweet grandmothers and quirky uncles? A world with bravery and sacrifice and love and laughter? A world with people capable of terrible things, yes, but also capable of breathtaking good. Evidently, that kind of world is worth it because it is the world that God decided to create. God would have it no other way. So, in light of God's love of freedom, we can see why God would put the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden. It was a means by which humanity could choose to reject him.